Accra, Ghana, 7 months before the wedding. The fabric always told her first. Before a bride spoke her vows or cried her joy, before she saw herself in the mirror, it was the fabric that whispered who she truly was. Melia and stood barefoot in her studio, fingertips grazing the edge of sun-warmed kente cloth, its reds and golds singing of lineage and legacy. Around her, bolts of Ankara leaned like soldiers, and sketches danced across corkboards in charcoal swirls. She was 29, unmarried, and unbothered. Her designs had walked runways from Lagos to Paris. She'd been called many things: visionary, stubborn, too African for Europe, not African enough for tradition, but none of them mattered. What mattered was her mother, and right now, her mother's breath came in shallow waves from a hospital bed across town, where another set of bills waited to devour her next invoice. Melia blinked at the scene before her. It needed restitching. She was halfway through threading the needle when her assistant burst in with her phone. "Melia, I think you should take this." The email subject line read, "Proposal for Global Expansion Partnership. Han Group International Seoul." Melia frowned. Han Group. She remembered them. Remembered the Johannesburg Gala, the exhibit they'd sponsored that turned sacred patterns into runway mockery. That video had gone viral. Her mentions exploded. But why would they reach out now? She scrolled. "We believe in bridging traditions across continents. Your voice is necessary. Please accept our invitation to Seoul. Full sponsorship, business class." At the bottom, a name stood out: Chairman Han Min-suk. Melia's stomach coiled. What does he want with me? She turned the screen off, but the words stayed. Your voice is necessary. Seoul. South Korea. 1 week later. The air smelled expensive. That was Melia's first thought as she stepped into the marbled lobby of Han Tower, jet-lagged but dressed like defiance in an indigo sheath dress and Ankara blazer. Every surface gleamed. The receptionist bowed. Cameras followed her movements like a slow drag of silk. "Miss Nkemdelim," the woman said, "the chairman is expecting you." Melia smiled tightly. Let's not keep him waiting. Chairman Han's office was the size of a cathedral, all cold glass and oppressive silence. He rose from behind his desk, gray-suited and silver-haired, with a face that had been shaped by money and sharpened by control. "Miss Nkemdelim," he said, bowing slightly. "Welcome to Seoul." She bowed back. "I'm surprised you invited me, Chairman Han." He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "I believe every empire needs course correction." She said nothing. "I've reviewed your work," he continued, "and I must say, you're not afraid to speak with a spine. I respect that." Melia raised an eyebrow. "Even when I'm speaking against you?" His smile widened. "Especially then." The heir with cold eyes. She met him at the boardroom table. Han Jae-won, the only son, the one who didn't smile. He stood when she entered, tall and sharp in a slate gray suit, with cheekbones like a blade and eyes like winter. "Miss Nkemdelim," he said. His voice was flat, polite, almost bored. "Mr. Han," she replied, steady. Their hands met briefly. His grip was light, cold, the kind of handshake that left no trace. But Melia had never needed permission to make an impression. The meeting began. They showed her charts, models, and maps of textile partnerships from Lagos to Jeonju. Her face would be the front, her style the hook. Han Group the engine behind it all. Melia listened, but her gaze flicked back to Jae-won often. He rarely looked at her. When he did, it was like being studied by a scientist who didn't trust what he saw. Later, after the presentation, she approached him directly. "You're not convinced," she said. He shrugged. You're ambitious, that's clear. But sometimes ambition makes people pliable. Melia stiffened. I don't fold, she said. He turned away before she could read his reaction. Neither do I, he thought. What Melia didn't know was that Chairman Han had already made a decision. She would be the bride, not as a gift, but as a warning. She had embarrassed him on a global stage. Jae-won had humiliated the family name by rejecting an arranged alliance with the Shim family. Now he'd bind them together. 2 problems, 1 solution. A televised wedding to placate investors. A secret vendetta to satisfy pride. She'll play her part, Chairman Han had told Jae-won. Let her have her dream until you wake her up. Jae-won, still angry, still broken, didn't ask questions. He assumed she was complicit. Of course she said yes, he had told himself. Why wouldn't she? Exposure, money, influence. She's ambitious, and ambitious women don't say no to power, just like Sora. It was easier to believe she was like the others, easier than letting himself hope she was different. And that was exactly what his father wanted. The wedding was announced in the press before she'd even said yes. Breaking news. Han heir set to wed African fashion powerhouse in historic partnership. Melia sat frozen in her hotel suite, the glow of the television painting her face in shades of disbelief. Her face, his, side by side, like it was already decided. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Emails, press inquiries, Ghanaian media outlets calling it a moment of history. A few headlines called her the lucky one. She felt anything but lucky. Melia picked up the phone and dialed the only number she had. Jae-won. He answered after 4 rings. You planned this? She asked. A pause. No. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. You didn't even ask me. I don't ask for what's already inevitable. Her hand tightened around the phone. Her throat burned. Inevitable, as if her life were a footnote in someone else's press release. She hung up without another word. That night, she didn't sleep. She scrolled. She paced. She prayed. Half-heartedly, angrily. Her mother's hospital room hovered in her mind like a ghost she couldn't banish. But the next morning, she called the Han publicist and said, "Tell them the bride says yes." That's when it all began. Her family's flights were mysteriously delayed. Her original designer pulled out. Her dress arrived days late, partially ruined. Every step forward felt like walking into a trap. But the papers had been signed, the sponsorships wired, the press hungry. And when she looked into her mother's eyes over a video call, watching her smile through an oxygen mask, Melia knew, I will not waste this. She'd give her people a seat at the table, even if the table was rigged, even if her groom wouldn't meet her eyes. The chandelier sparkled like a crown above her head. But Melia stood alone. Her gown, a custom piece of ivory satin and hand-sewn Ghanaian lace, was frayed at the hem, its train uneven, its bodice creased. It had arrived an hour before the ceremony, wrinkled, poorly packaged, smelling faintly of mildew. It must have been mishandled in customs, the stylist mumbled apologetically. Melia only nodded, jaw tight. It's still mine. I'll wear it. The string quartet that was supposed to fill the glass ballroom with Debussy? Gone. Canceled due to last-minute illness, the planner claimed. Then her phone buzzed. A voicemail from her sister, panicked and breathless. Melia, we missed the connection in Doha. They changed our gate at the last minute. Half the group is stuck in transit. We're trying, I swear. Her family, the soul of her joy, would not be there. She smoothed the front of her dress with trembling hands. Bad luck, she whispered to her reflection. Just bad luck. The ceremony went on. Melia walked down the aisle alone. No father, no sister, no music. Just the soft sound of her heels tapping against marble and the eyes of strangers watching her with a mixture of awe and pity. Jaewon stood at the altar, expression unreadable beneath the glow of the cameras. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't smile. When the officiant said, "You may now kiss the bride," he merely bowed slightly. A flicker of respect or dismissal, she couldn't tell, and when she turned to leave the room as Mrs. Han, her heart felt heavier than ever before. She entered the honeymoon suite 2 hours later. Empty, no groom, no note, just champagne, untouched, and a bed turned down by hotel staff. Crisp, clinical. She sat down on the edge of the mattress, hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry. She found him downstairs, in the bar. He was still in his tuxedo, the top button undone, tie loose like a man halfway through a funeral. Melia approached quietly, her heels muted by the plush carpet. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her until she spoke. "Should I start calling you husband?" she said, voice soft. "Or is that too inconvenient tonight?" Jaewon took a long sip of his drink, then, without looking at her, "Don't make this sentimental. You knew what this was." She blinked, her stomach flipping. "What did you just say?" He finally turned toward her, eyes bloodshot from whiskey and something older. Grief, perhaps, or guilt long decayed into armor. "You wanted the platform. I gave it to you. You got your story. I played my role." Her voice dropped. "Is that what you think of me? A story?" He stood, unsteady but proud. "You don't know what this world is like?" "No," she said, stepping back, her voice like steel. "But I do know what you are. And so help me, Han Jaewon. One day, you will too." She arrived at the estate the next morning, not weeping, not broken. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, her curls pinned into an elegant chignon, she stepped through the grand entrance like she owned it. She greeted the staff by name. She offered a thank you to the driver who picked her up. She complimented the chef after breakfast, even though she hadn't touched a bite. The house was a mausoleum, rich, silent, and filled with eyes. But Melia never shrank. At board dinners, she asked clever questions. At fundraisers, she charmed donors with fluency in both Korean and French. And at night, behind closed doors, she stitched, pouring her pain into new bridal designs, thread by thread. Jaewon watched from afar. She unnerved him, not with rage, not with vengeance, but with poise, with the refusal to fold. It came by accident. A whisper from a staffer, a slip of paper left in a guest planner's folder. It was all there. Jaewon had made the calls. He'd instructed the planner to cancel the quartet. He'd leaked false travel info to the airline. He'd even arranged for the damaged gown to be delivered late, not out of neglect, but out of belief that she was a pawn, a threat, a convenience. Melia sat on the balcony that night, fingers curled around the armrest of a teak chair, the city glittering below like something unreachable. She didn't cry, but her stomach coiled. He didn't just abandon me. He orchestrated my shame. Her phone buzzed. A message from the head of PR about an upcoming gala. She deleted it and stood. Later that night, she knocked on the door to his private study. He looked up, startled, like he'd seen a ghost. "I thought you'd storm out the moment you found out," he said hoarsely. She stepped inside, calm, too calm. "I almost did." He set his pen down. "Then why didn't you?" She tilted her head, eyes never leaving his. "Because leaving would mean you never see what it looks like when a woman rises from what you burned." His throat bobbed. "Melia." No. She turned. Her heels echoed like gavel strikes against the marble. Watch closely, Jaewon. This is the last thing you'll ever control. It was the first time she'd smiled in weeks. Melia's heels clicked through the glass atrium of the Han Group headquarters, but this time her stride wasn't weary. It was surprised, literature alive. Kwame? He turned at the sound of her voice, and for a moment, Soul disappeared. There he was, the boy with sun-warmed skin, a crooked smile, and the eyes of home. So I wasn't hallucinating when I saw Melia and Kem Dalim on the partner list. He grinned, pulling her into a hug before she could respond. His scent, cinnamon and cedar, took her straight back to dusty schoolyards in Accra, late-night bonfire debates, and the afternoon he had first slipped a gold ring onto her finger under the mango tree. She'd given that ring back to him that year. I didn't know you were in Korea, she said, stepping back but not pulling away completely. I wasn't, until last quarter. He nodded toward the towering building. My company just signed a development deal with Han Group, blockchain for medical supply chains. Melia raised a brow. Of course you're still saving the world. He chuckled. And you're still stunning, even more than the last time you broke my heart. That afternoon, they had lunch at a hidden garden cafe near Bukchon. Laughter flowed like tea between them. For the first time since the wedding, Melia spoke freely. She didn't have to explain herself, code switch, or armor up. With Kwame, she was just Melia, not the designer, not the wife, not the pawn. And Jaewon noticed. What's he doing here? Jaewon snapped, slamming the door to his father's executive lounge. Chairman Han didn't look up from his tea. Kwame Danso, the West African tech savant. Brilliant man. Charming. Perfect media asset for our African expansion. He's her ex. Yes. And? Jaewon's fist clenched at his sides. You invited him. I made a business deal, Chairman Han said coldly, pouring his tea with surgical precision. That girl isn't your concern. She's my wife. Chairman Han raised his brow. A wife you refuse to touch, disgraced publicly, allowed to be mocked by shareholders. That wife? Silence, sharp and unbreathable. And then, why her? Jaewon asked, his voice low. Out of everyone you could have used to punish me, why Melia? Chairman Han stirred his tea once, twice, then finally looked his son in the eye. Because she humiliated me. 1 year ago. The gala had been a grand affair in Johannesburg, a global heritage exhibit hosted by the Han Foundation, showcasing traditional African designs. Except they weren't traditional, they were knockoffs, and they were modeled by pale-skinned celebrities in wax prints with mismatched head wraps. Melia, then still rising in the design world, had stood up in the middle of the ceremony. She'd taken the microphone from a stunned hostess and said, "This isn't heritage, this is theft, and we're not flattered." Her speech had gone viral. Sponsors pulled out. Stock prices dipped for a day. Chairman Han had smiled for the cameras, but behind closed doors, he had vowed revenge. She embarrassed me on a global stage, Chairman Han said calmly, and I chose to return the favor. Jaewon went still, cold. You used me, he said. I disciplined you. You wanted to rebel. You got your rebellion. She's not the enemy, Jaewon whispered, almost to himself. His father tilted his head. Then why did you treat her like one? He found her on the rooftop, a blanket over her shoulders, staring out at the city. The wind caught her curls as she turned slowly toward him. I thought you were part of it, he said hoarsely. My father. He made it look like you were. Melia's eyes narrowed, her voice low and sharp. You thought I was what? Another Sora? You saw me standing in that ruined dress, alone at the altar, and still thought I was in on it? He swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe it, but I've been used before. I thought maybe you saw a chance. The spotlight, the sponsorships. She laughed, a bitter sound that caught on the wind. You didn't just mistrust me, Jaewon. You judged me. You lumped me in with every woman who ever hurt your pride and called it protection. He stepped closer. The air between them was too tight, too hot. I know what he did to you, why he picked you. It wasn't random. She turned sharply, eyes glistening. He picked me to be punished. I was the example. I stood up for my culture, and your father handed me to you like a warning label. Her voice trembled, but she didn't blink. And you let him. God help me, he whispered. I did. Melia didn't respond. Her silence was heavier than a scream. He swallowed. But I see it now, and I swear, on my name, on my company, on whatever I have left, I'll make this right. She shook her head, stepping back. Don't make promises, Jaewon. Not to me. Save them for the next woman your father chooses. She left him on the rooftop, alone, and for the first time in his life. He realized what it meant to be truly powerless. The first time she saw the photo, Melia thought it was a mistake. A grainy tabloid cover. Jaewon and Sora holding hands in front of a black town car. The headline screamed across newsstands. Han heir reunites with former flame. Divorce imminent? Melia froze in the middle of the Seoul airport, her boarding pass clutched in one hand, her heart in free fall. They were supposed to meet that morning. He had called the night before, asking for a chance to talk. He sounded different, raw, even hopeful. She'd said yes, and now she crushed the paper in her hand, walked through security, and boarded the flight alone. Jaewon sat in the dark, the paper crushed in his fist, her face beside his. Sora's triumphant smirk frozen in newsprint ink. He hadn't meant for Melia to see that, hadn't meant for it to happen at all. 3 days earlier, he had been waiting at the rooftop bar of the Conrad, whiskey half finished, tie undone. Sora arrived like she still owned the place, flawless, elegant, and venom wrapped in velvet. She sat without asking. You look thinner, she purred. Marriage not agreeing with you? He said nothing. She placed a sleek black phone on the table, tapped the screen once. Audio crackled. Yes, Mr. Han. The laundering will be hidden under the textile subsidiary. The Ghana deal is a perfect cover. No one will suspect your daughter-in-law's name. His breath caught. That's illegal, he said. Of course it is, Sora smiled. And when it leaks, your father goes down. Melia's company burns. Your board resigns. He stared at her, bile rising. What do you want? She leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Stay with me, publicly. Let the world think we're reconciled, or I destroy her, your family, and your precious empire. I lost her anyway, he whispered to himself. The tabloids didn't show the rest. They didn't show how Jaewon left Sora in the rain. Didn't show how he threw the phone into the Han Group fountain. Didn't show the way he screamed at his father that night, fist slamming on a mahogany desk. You used her name to launder money? Jaewon's voice split the air. The glass in his hand trembled. Chairman Han didn't flinch. He sipped his tea, precise, unbothered. She was convenient, he said. Your charity obsession made the perfect cover. Jaewon's fists clenched at his sides. She believed in us, in this family, and you turned her into a liability. Chairman Han set the cup down. She was never family, Jaewon. She was a lesson. You disobeyed me. I made sure you remembered what that costs. Silence, and then, You humiliated her, Jaewon said quietly. You humiliated me. And yet here we are, his father said, smiling coldly. You finally understand what legacy really means. But the world didn't see that part. All Melia saw was betrayal. Again. She didn't cry when she landed in Accra. Didn't text him. Didn't rage. She unpacked her boxes in a small brick studio at the edge of Jamestown, laid bolts of indigo-dyed cloth across the table, and breathed. For the first time in months, she felt something like peace. Melia employed 5 seamstresses, all women, all survivors of something. They called her Madame Melia, with respect, not reverence. Her new collection, Ashes and Altars, went viral after a feature in Vogue Africa. Traditional Ankara blended with silk organza, bold prints shaped like wings, wedding gowns that told stories. Beauty from broken vows, one headline read. A woman who stitched her pain into power. Kwame returned. Of course he did. He brought flowers, a sponsorship offer, and a quiet proposal one warm night under the jacaranda tree. I know we've both changed, he said, gently taking her hand, but we could start again, as partners, as something more. Melia looked at him, the man who had once known her soul, and she smiled. Kwame, I will always be grateful for you. Then why not? Because I'm not a prize, she said, her voice soft but firm. And I won't be chosen again just because I survived. I want to choose, freely. And right now, he asked, swallowing hard, I choose me. She returned the ring in the morning, but kept the jacaranda blossoms he'd left in her sketchbook. 6 months later, she stood backstage at the Paris Artisan Gala, watching her models walk. One wore the frayed lace of the dress she'd worn on her wedding day. Repurposed, reborn. She no longer carried the weight of a husband, a name, or a betrayal. Only the power of her own hands. And somewhere, in the back row of the audience, a man in a worn-out coat, no longer rich, no longer proud, watched her with eyes full of regret. Jaewon was no longer the heir, just a man who had fallen in love too late. The headlines came and went. Han Jaewon bankrupt, resigns from Han Group, estranged from father. Melia didn't read the articles. She had learned long ago that words, like people, could lie. He flew to Ghana with nothing but a duffel bag, his passport, and guilt heavy enough to buckle his spine. He didn't ask to see her. Didn't dare. Instead, he showed up at the Makola Market Design Hub, silent as a prayer. No title, no pride. When they asked him what he could do, he said, I'll sweep, stitch, load crates, just tell me where to start. And they did. He worked under the name Jay, without revealing who he was. But word travels, and the woman he'd wronged, she knew. Of course she knew. Meanwhile, Melia had nearly called him, once. The power had gone out in Accra. She sat on the floor of her studio, candles flickering over piles of silk and failed sketches. For a moment, the weight of the silence became unbearable. She reached for her phone, paused. I almost called him, she would later confess. But then I remembered his silence was louder than the blackout. So instead, she reached for the one thing that never failed her, a needle. She stitched the torn lace of her ruined wedding gown into a new bodice, not to erase the past, but to wear it like armor. Kwame found Jaewon 3 days before the show. He met him behind the loading bay, sleeves rolled up, dust on his hands. You think sweat makes you worthy now? Kwame asked coolly. Jaewon didn't answer. Kwame stepped forward, tone sharpened. If you came here to soothe your guilt, leave now. She is not your redemption arc." "She's not," J1 replied quietly. "She's my compass, the only one I trust." "Then stop making her choose between the future and a man who only found his soul after losing his wallet." Kwame didn't stay to hear a reply. The Accra Arts Center buzzed like a beehive. International editors, fashion buyers, local queens in gold-threaded wrappers. She paced backstage, clipboard in hand, hiding trembling fingers behind a face of carved stone. And then she saw him, wearing a black staff shirt, folding chairs in the third row, sweat clinging to his collar. He was bent low, adjusting the lighting angles, nodding to stage managers, carrying crates. No one else noticed, but she did. Her breath caught. She walked past him like he was a stranger. He didn't flinch, didn't call her name. But someone else asked later, curious, "Why are you working here? Aren't you Han Jae-won?" And his answer was soft, reverent. "Because before I can walk beside her, I need to learn to kneel beside her dreams." A week before the show, Chairman Han had reached out with an offer, a contract, a global platform, an apology wrapped in luxury. She declined with a single line, written on the back of his letter and returned by mail. "Your empire doesn't need me, Mr. Han, but women like me, we will build empires without you." The private showing took place the next evening in a small rooftop garden in Osu. No flashing lights, no press, just Melia, her team, and a handful of women who had walked with her through fire. She saved the final gown for last. It floated into the light like a prayer, ivory and amber, hand-stitched with mulberry silk from Korea and indigo batik from Ghana. The bodice shimmered with beadwork shaped like blooming jacaranda, and on the hem, her mother's initials, and the initials of the man who'd once broken her, then learned to serve. The room hushed. She turned, and there he was. Not in a suit, not in wealth, just real. Calloused hands, faded linen, hair longer, eyes softer. In his hand was not a ring, but a sketch, a bridle line, inspired by West African silhouettes and traditional Korean hanbok layers. Hand-drawn, signed, for us. "This time," Jae-won said, his voice breaking, "I didn't come to win you. I came to build with you. From thread to vow, no lies, no contracts, just us." Melia stared at him. Tears welled, but did not fall. She stepped forward, picked up the sketch, and looked down at it. "Only if we start from the beginning," she whispered. He nodded. She took his hand, and the rooftop bloomed with applause, with quiet weeping, with the soft sound of a woman who chose, freely, fiercely, and finally, to love again. In every piece from the Delum X Han Atelier, a single line is hand-stitched on the inside. Love, not power. Legacy, not empire. Together. And at the very bottom of the new collection's final bridal train, a message hidden in silver thread. For the woman who chooses herself first. The end.